Sabres win to wrap up their West Coast road trip, but the road trip's still a failure. We'll talk about it. I've got some thoughts on Peyton Krebs and a good question from our listeners that I want to get to coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a show today that is presented by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Locked On so you can get your $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. The Sabres win out west in the Big Pringle in Calgary. Sabres beat the Flames 4-1. We'll talk a little bit about the game and more so the road trip in general from Detroit out west that ended in Calgary. Not a great trip, and the Sabres are pretty much dead when it comes to this playoff race as they return home. I've got some thoughts on Peyton Krebs. I was a Peyton Krebs stan at one point. I really wanted to see this guy get an opportunity, and I am first in line to raise my hand and say I am utterly disappointed in what we've seen from Krebs since the Mittelstadt trade. Some numbers. We'll look at that coming up in the second segment of today's show. And then an interesting question that we've been tossing around in our Locked On Sabres text line, which, by the way, if you are not a member of, you can sign up. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. You hit the button there, text back and forth with us, where today you could have been interacting on a question of who, if you could choose one player, would you like to take a giant leap next season? Zach Benson or Owen Power? A lot of good answers on that. A good debate that we've been having raging in the chat that I want to read some answers of coming up on today's show as well. If you want to follow me on Twitter, at Sneaky Joe Sports, the podcast account is at Locked On Sabres. Be sure to check us out on our YouTube channel as well. If you're someone that likes to listen to the show and you want to watch it once in a while, YouTube. Type in Locked On Sabres, you'll find us right there. We'll start with last night's game. 4-1, Sabres over the Flames. And they played fine. They played pretty good. The Flames were coming off a back-to-back. They were in Vancouver the night before. So it was a game where I thought they should have been the better team. But okay, you did what you should. No criticism from me on that front, obviously. The Sabres actually faced a really strong goaltending effort in this game and still found a way to win. Dustin Wolf, who going into the year has been kind of co-mentioned with Devin Levi as the best goalie prospect in the world, or at least one of the best goalie prospects in the world, was in net. Wolf, a little bigger than Levi, but also one of these smaller goaltenders, 5'11", 6 foot, maybe younger, 7th round pick in 2019. I mean, there are so many comparables between Dustin Wolf and Devin Levi, and he's finally getting a little bit of a crack here in the NHL. He's now played 9 starts, 900 save percentage, so decent numbers. And I thought he was really good. I thought he bailed the Flames out a bunch of times in that game against the Sabres. The Sabres had 22 scoring chances on the night, 10 high danger chances, which was better than the Flames. Expected goals for was 52% for the Sabres. So again, slightly the better team. Wolf was very strong in net. Luukkonen matched him though. Luukkonen, I mean, at one point, a big breakaway save, a couple of other odd man rushes that he turned away. So overall, thought it was a strong effort from the Sabres. Nothing crazy. Nothing all that bad. The Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, JJ Peterka line strikes again. That line has been so good since they've been put together. I love how the speed of Peterka and Tuch opened things up for Tage Thompson. This was another game where I saw that happening. Tage ends up with a goal and an assist. The goal was on an empty netter. He made a nice turnover at center ice to put it in. The Peterka play is Thompson and Tuch. I mean, Tuch is in on the forecheck. He's such a good forechecker. Turns it over. It goes to Thompson behind the net, and he's able to find Peterka out at center. And the one thing we know about Peterka is he is a good finisher, and that's why he's got 4 goals since he's been on that line. He's got 2 line mates that are getting him a bunch of chances now on a night-to-night basis. 3 goals, on that line, but he is finding a way to score, and I would keep that line together basically through the end of the season. It actually made me wonder if Peterka and Tage is a combination that they should stick with for a while here. I like the speed dynamic of Peterka with him, and Tuck has that too, but I also next year am not going to want to see them split up Peterka and Jack Quinn. So, I hesitate to say they shouldn't do Cousins, Quinn, and Peterka when everybody's back healthy eventually. But I wonder about Tage with Peterka and Quinn as a line combination in the future, especially when every single time they have put Alex Tuck and Dylan Cousins together, that combination has worked. So maybe there's a future that has Tage filling that Cousins spot between Peterka and Quinn, and then you let Cousins and Tuck cook on a amazing 2-way line. If Cousins can keep growing in that area, maybe a pair Benson with him in the future, find someone else. Interesting combinations that I was thinking about last night during this game. Sabres did not give up a goal 5-on-5. Thought defensively they were pretty strong on the night. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen made one of the nicer assists you will see from a goaltender. This wasn't he made a blocker save and then a teammate picked it up and shot it down into the empty net. This was Luukkonen almost faking out the Flames, I think making them think and making me think he was going to shoot the puck down into the empty net, and instead goes behind the back, behind his own net to Connor Clifton, and Clifton fires it from his own end all the way down into the empty net. So Luukkonen gets his first assist of the season. Going all the way back to the beginning, Peyton Krebs opened the scoring for the Sabres. I want to talk about Krebs when we come back. He scored last night, but there has not been much of that for him. We'll talk about Krebs and his role post-Mittelstadt trade when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by the Gametime app. We've got a homestand coming up, a lot of opportunities to go down to the arena. And listen, tickets aren't that expensive when the team isn't this good. So you got a pretty, reasonable opportunity, I think, to go check out some hockey at the end of the year. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, theater events near you, killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, their best price guaranteed. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My favorite feature, you see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, even an hour after it starts. It's the best place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. You watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel for you every day, bringing you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today, can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sabres win 4-1 over the Calgary Flames. Peyton Krebs opened the scoring. Going back home, I thought I saw on the broadcast that he had some family in town for that. Western hockey guy, born in Calgary, played not too far away from there with the Kootenay Ice. Funny thing, by the way, I did see this on Twitter, that the Sportsnet broadcast, Sportsnet should be making mistakes like this. You're from Canada, you should know this. Someone said, and they were maybe joking, so I shouldn't criticize them too much, that, well, this is about as close as it gets for a Dylan Cousins home game. Calgary to Whitehorse, Yukon, is a 23-hour drive. I mean, Whitehorse is like the moon. It is so far away from everything. So Dylan Cousins doesn't really have home games. This was a home game for Peyton Krebs with going back home, and he opened the scoring. Nice decisive shot, low glove and away. beats Dustin Wolf. He was coming in with speed, the type of goal that I'd love to watch all the time from Peyton Krebs. But he really, last night was standing. And even last night, like, there wasn't much after that goal that he scored. So I know I picked a weird day to kind of, take a shot at him here. But I have not been impressed. I really have not been impressed by Peyton Krebs' game since the Sabres traded Casey Mittelstadt. I mean, I said it all year long. Others have said it too, that it's hard to judge Peyton Krebs and whether or not he has the chops to be an offensive playmaker in the NHL when he never gets to play with good offensive talent, always playing with Kyle Okposo and Zemgus Girgensons. Well, okay, kid, here's your shot. Mittelstadt out the door. He's gone to Colorado, and he's been playing with, before the last 2 games, he was getting minutes with JJ Peterka. He's got his minutes with Zach Benson. He's played pretty primarily, I think, since that Nashville game earlier in the month. He's been playing with Jeff Skinner a lot, and Skinner can finish. And what has it resulted in? 1 goal and 2 assists in 9 games. That's not good enough. That's not replacing what Casey Mittelstadt was doing in that role. And I was hopeful that that was in there, that this player stylistically resembles Mittelstadt. He is a pass-first mentality, great playmaker, good vision. And I do think Krebs has good vision, but something's not clicking. I don't know if the game is too quick for him. I don't know if he is lacking so much far behind Mittelstadt as a scorer that defenders just give him zero respect when it comes to the shot. Mittelstadt, defenders had to start respecting him a little bit more over the years because he was a decent finisher. Maybe Krebs is just a 0 on that front, or maybe a 1 because he did score last night. So I don't really know what it is, but I'm not noticing him. I'm looking for him. I'm not noticing these stellar offensive plays that you would have thought were in there for Vegas's #1 prospect that was a mid-first round pick. And if you go all the way back to Krebs' draft year, his talent wasn't even what knocked him down to the middle of that first round in 2019, where he went 17th overall. An Achilles injury is why he got knocked down. If he didn't have an Achilles injury, I mean, if I'm really reaching back to remember this, it's been 5 years, but I feel like I'm remembering him being talked about as a top 10 pick. The talent was always there. It's just not realizing itself, though, even now when he's getting some better line mates. One thing I will say in Krebs' defense, and it's a small thing, and it's not, to me, powerful enough to outweigh my disappointment, he's not playing a lot of minutes. So he is getting better teammates, more offensive teammates. He's not playing a lot of minutes. I mean, it was 11 minutes and 30 seconds last night. He has not played 16 minutes of ice time since the Mittelstadt trade. In fact, while I'm looking at his game log, he's only played 16 minutes of ice time. Well, I guess earlier in the year he was doing it a little bit more, but it's been a while. He hasn't done it since December 16th that he's played, and I picked a weird benchmark there. He's just not playing a lot. He doesn't get power play minutes a lot. So, I don't know that he's really earned it. I just wanted to see him get a shot. But okay, here's his shot. Part of my theory on Krebs was you can't know that he's not a good offensive player because you haven't seen him with good line mates. Well, now you could say it more and more every game that passes. It's only 9 games so far, so you're going to want a bigger sample size than that. And I thought Paul Hamilton made a good point at WGR on Monday morning when I asked him about this, which was, listen, as disappointing as he's been, it's hard to write off a 23-year-old center that is a skilled player and was a high draft pick when we have seen Casey Mittelstadt get written off at 23 years old, and he turned into a pretty solid player. I mean, I don't think Thompson's as good a comparison as Mittelstadt is, but same thing with him. You wrote him off at 23. I did, and he turned into a great player. It's more Mittelstadt, though. If you gave Mittelstadt, we all watched Mittelstadt go from underdeveloped, immature, bodied off the puck, fanned on it all the time, young player in the NHL, taxi squad right? Mittelstadt was on Ralph Kruger's taxi squad. He wasn't even on the regular lineup during the COVID season. He went from that to a player that was good enough to get them Bo Byram in a trade, and by the way, is now about a point per game player in Colorado. So he matured. Maybe Krebs can do the same thing. That's the best I can do, though, now, because I can't sit here anymore and tell you, well, you can't tell me he's not a good offensive player. I mean, he's out there with Jeff Skinner. You got somebody. You got a guy that even in a down year, Jeff Skinner is still right up there at the top of the team in goals with 24. Like, you've got a guy that could put the puck in the back of the net, and it's still not happening for you. So that makes me wonder about the offseason a lot. And we'll talk about this more once the season is over. But Krebs has got 10 games here. This is an audition for him. Show the team, show the organization that you can be the third line center. You could be the next man up behind Cousins and Tage. Because if the next 10 games look like the last 9 games, then I got news for you. We're going to be talking a lot about third line center this summer. And I'm going to be predicting that the Sabres will do something about it. Not just that it's a good idea, but I would bet the Sabres will do something. Krebs maybe has a chance here to stop that, but he's got to start putting up some production. He's got to start either putting the puck in the back of the net and being a more of a shot first guy, or he's got to be the player that everyone thought he could be when he was drafted, which is that stud level playmaker. Something's got to give in the final 10 games for Peyton Krebs. When we come back, a little bit more about next year. Question that we were asking in our group chat earlier for our subtext: Benson or Power? If you could pick one to have a massive breakout next season, who would you pick? That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by Sleeper. It is nearing the end of the season. Standings don't look good. It's a 2.5% chance for Buffalo to make the playoffs. But I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you win 100 times your cash. You can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you got to do, pick from a list of players. You got your McDavids, your Draisaitls, your Ovechkins, your Crosbys, your McKinnons. Ovechkin heating up lately, by the way. And pick whether they'll record more or less than their sleeper projections for goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, or more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. And then you can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention, nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. It's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. The Sabres sit 6 points out of a playoff spot. Washington and Detroit on Tuesday night, so they very easily could be 8 points out. They do have 2 games left against the Capitals. So in that way, I guess you might be rooting for Washington to get a point or to get 2 points against Detroit because the Sabres make up their own ground. But I'm not spending time thinking about the playoffs anymore. They had their chance. I got hyped for their couple of head-to-heads against the Islanders and the Red Wings. And then they were live going into the West Coast road trip. But it's dead. 2.5%. When your odds are lower to make the playoffs than to get the number 1 overall pick, then I'm considering that dead. So I don't think these are going to be interesting home games. I've got a subject matter I want to talk about on tomorrow's show, though, about how ugly it might get in that arena down the stretch here. Because there is an aura of this fan-player disconnect that has been out there on social media, and like Alex talked about it a little bit on 32 Thoughts again last week. We've had other players talk about it. We'll talk about that in our next show. That's for next show. Interesting question that we were talking about on our Locked On Sabres text line. If you are not a sortie, you can sign up. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. We asked, next year, you can have one player have a major breakout. One player will have a major breakout of 2 names. Who would you pick? Owen Power or Zach Benson? The reason I picked those 2 They're different positions, and they are the two guys on the team right now that, to me, have the highest ceilings and have also yet to break out. Like, I wasn't going to pick Tage Thompson or Dylan Cousins because, well, they've already broken out. I mean, you want them to take a big jump next year, but we've already seen what the jump looks like. So, Peterka, same thing. Like, we've kind of seen the jump. He's already taken a somewhat jump. Power, there should be a massive leap still to come. Benson, there should also still be a massive leap still to come. So, who would you pick? Couple of good answers that I want to read through from our text line. Start from one texter. I'm going to say Power, but I don't feel especially confident in that answer. The reason I'd say Power is I'm hoping and praying Cousins, Thompsons, and friends return to form, and then a giant leap from Benson would be half as necessary. If those guys don't return to form, good grief, they will need Benson to be absolutely legit. 60-point Benson season would be profoundly impactful, but maybe somehow Power takes a giant leap for SaberKind, and then their top 4D is set for the next 10 years. This is good reasoning. I like this answer. Power, in my opinion, also has a higher ceiling for his next step than Benson might. Benson, I think, right, there will be some middle ground. There will be, all right, this year, he was a good two-way player, and he's going to have about 30 points, but maybe he could double that. 60-point season, a little faster, a little stronger. But Power, I mean, what's the leap look like for Power? The power leap might be he's one of the best young defensemen in hockey, and that could happen as soon as next year. So that's, to me, why this is a good debate, and the one listener puts voice to that. Another answer from this. If you're asking who I want to take a step forward, it has to be Power. While I know our year has been plagued by lackluster offense, I think you could live with Benson coming back and performing the exact same way as this year. Keep in mind, out of all of our prospects, he's 18 years old. You have depth offensively. I think Power needs to have a huge year. An elite top four of Dahlin, Sammy, Bo, and Power would feed generations. Another good answer. This is another Power answer. The only thing I would pick apart in this answer is I don't think we would all take Benson being the exact same next year. I mean, we like what Benson's doing at 18, but you're going to want to see a step. You're going to want to see more offense, right? Or you're going to want to see more offense from Zach Benson in year number 2, even if it's only 50 points. I think you're going to want to see that. And then finally, another answer for Power. I should find a Benson answer, but some of these were good reasonings for Power. NHL defensemen usually take longer to develop. He's taken a step back this year as he's learned more aspects of the game at the NHL level. Having Dahlin as potential captain and Byram on the team will give Power 2 great defensemen to watch, especially with quick breakouts and going to the net. I believe Benson's biggest leap will come in 2 years when he develops physically, as he's only 18. He's got the hockey IQ and the playmaking skills, but still needs to win pucks or be able to work the boards better, and that will come when he's built bigger and tougher. Another good answer that said Power. Let me find a Benson answer. This one's a little short and sweet, but easy. Benson, if he can put on muscle alone, that would be the biggest leap to help win battles along the boards. Benson, by the way, it was multiple times I heard it talked about Benson and the boards. Like, he does pretty well for his size, and I think he wins more board battles than you think. I mean, if he puts on the muscle like he will, I mean, he could be a dominant player on the walls like that, even at his size. So I guess I get it. But I don't think Benson is bad at that. Like, Mittelstadt, when he showed up, I just mentioned it, we're talking about Krebs, Mittelstadt got bodied off the puck easier than any player I've ever seen when he first entered the NHL. Like, he couldn't hang on to it. Benson will fight. Benson will fight for it. He will not give it up so easily. Even now, he'll be on the ice on one knee, and he will still be taking the cross check and fighting off defenders to try to pin it there and wheel it to somebody else. So, yeah, Benson can grow a lot on the wall like that, but I don't think he's at a bad starting point. I think he's already decent at some of those battles. See if I can find one more Benson answer. Let's see here. I guess, there were a lot of Powers. I love Benson's work ethic on the ice. If that is also his approach off the ice, I'd expect a big jump from Benson. So this is someone saying he thinks it's Benson more likely. My answer, I might say Benson, honestly. So the reason why is some of the points that I'll steal from some of our listeners. I mean, one about power and how it could take time for young defensemen to kind of grow into their games, especially Power. Power is in the NHL and got drafted first overall, not because of his blazing speed, not because of his dynamic offensive ability, not because of his bone-crushing hits. Remember, he was already talked about in Michigan as someone that didn't do that. He got drafted first because of his mental game, the control that he can kind of just smother the other team out on the ice. You can't take it from him. He's always going to make the right play. That type of mindset. That is a more of a mental ability. And that is something that might take a couple of years for him to develop. And I think it has taken him a couple of years to develop. So I think Power is going to be that type of guy where he won't be at his best until he's fully matured. And you're not going to get a lot of flashes in between because he's not a very flashy player. So because of that, I do have confidence Power will eventually get there. It might just be a little slow. Benson on a team that can't score goals, and to me, needs someone to develop into their best offensive player, because I now have serious questions that Tage Thompson could be the best offensive player on a legit Stanley Cup contender. I think Benson has the ability to be the Sabres' best offensive player. Like, if you told me in 5 years, who would you like to be their best offensive player? I'd say Benson, because I think his ceiling, sky's the limit. Like, sky's the limit. 90 to 100 points, potentially, for Benson. Maybe even higher than that, but I don't know how crazy I really want to get here. But the fact that he's already in the NHL, that everyone's got him ranked as one of the best prospects in the world, I think I need to consider that a possibility for him. But for him to get to that, I'm going to take a bit of a futuristic approach here. For him to get to that 100-point ceiling, if that is in there, if there is a 100-point ceiling in there for Zach Benson, then you're going to need to see some signs next year. He's going to have to take a step, and a big step. Like, I am talking double his point total. I am talking 60 to 65 points for Zach Benson next season. Zach Benson, I talked about earlier, that top 6. If Skinner is going to, into his 30s, take on a little bit more of a diminished role, more of a secondary score on a third scoring line, playing more like 15 minutes a night, that's going to be Jeff Skinner in his next phase of his career. That's the spot that someone could earn a top 6 role. What I'd like to see next year is Zach Benson to grab hold of a top 6 role like that and run with it. Go play with Dylan Cousins on a line and put up 25 goals and 40 assists. That, to me, is the type of step that I want to see from Zach Benson, because at 19 years old, if he could do that, then we are still, I think, realistically wondering if the 100-point ceiling is still there. If he gets to 60 to 65-point player as a 19-year-old, then I think the possibility of him being a 100-point guy in his future is still very much alive. So because of that, I think I'd pick Benson. I would pick Benson because I think I've got the best. I could have Dahlin can absolutely be the best defenseman on a Stanley Cup contender. I don't know if I've got the answer forward, and I'm really hoping Zach Benson can become that answer. Good answers on this. If you want to tweet me, you can do that at Locked On Sabres. And I got a poll up that we can vote on as well if you think it's an interesting question. Tomorrow on the show, I mentioned I want to talk a little bit about some of the social media dialect that we've had on Monday about the fans and the team and the disconnect there. And especially now that we have a homestand coming up where they're pretty much out of the playoff picture. And maybe it gets ugly in that building if they don't support in the next 5 years. Sabres and Senators on Wednesday is our next game. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but I want to talk more about that conversation next time. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. We're the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.